The cruelest people don't always laugh because you're a failure. Sometimes they laugh because they believe you'll never become anything more. Those words didn't make sense to me until the night I walked into my 5-year high school reunion. The ballroom looked almost exactly the way I remembered it. Warm lights hanging from crystal chandeliers, polished wooden floors reflecting soft music, old classmates hugging each other as if time had politely waited outside the door. Laughter echoed across the room, mixed with stories about careers, children, vacations, and the lives everyone wanted everyone else to admire. I stood just inside the entrance, adjusting the cuff of my navy suit. No one recognized me at first. 5 years can change a man. Not only the gray beginning to appear near his temples, not only the confidence that replaces insecurity. 5 years can erase the version of you people insist on remembering. I signed my name at the registration table. Daniel Carter. The volunteer smiled politely before looking up again. Oh my God, Daniel. I returned a small smile. It's been a while. It really has. Before she could say anything else, another familiar voice floated across the room. Well, look who finally showed up. I knew that voice instantly. Olivia Brooks. My ex-wife. The room seemed quieter, although the music hadn't changed. She walked toward me wearing an elegant emerald dress that fit perfectly, her natural curls resting neatly over one shoulder. 5 years hadn't stolen her beauty. If anything, they had sharpened it. She stopped only a few feet away. Her smile looked friendly. Her eyes weren't. I almost didn't recognize you, she said. I guess that's normal after 5 years. She crossed her arms. I heard you disappeared. I've been busy. She laughed. Busy doing what? A few nearby classmates glanced in our direction. I shrugged. Living. Another laugh. Louder this time. You always did have funny answers. Someone behind her asked how long we'd been divorced. Olivia answered before I could. 5 years. She emphasized the number like it represented a victory. I suppose everyone remembers how determined Daniel was to become successful. Several people chuckled. I remained silent. She looked around the circle. You know what's funny? No one interrupted. He always said he had big dreams. She looked back at me. I guess dreams don't pay mortgages. More laughter. Someone tried to change the subject. Someone else smiled awkwardly. But embarrassment spreads faster than kindness. Olivia wasn't finished. I honestly thought you'd at least become something. She gestured vaguely. A manager somewhere. A consultant. I don't know. But you vanished. She tilted her head. So, what do you actually do now? Dozens of eyes landed on me. 5 years ago that would have terrified me. Tonight, it felt strangely peaceful. I answered honestly. I build companies. Silence. Then another burst of laughter. I mean seriously, Olivia said. I am serious. She smiled the way people smile at children pretending to be astronauts. Oh, Daniel. You never could let go of fantasies. One of our former classmates leaned toward another. I think he means startups. They all say they're entrepreneurs. The whispers spread. I could almost hear people building stories inside their heads. Failed business. Living paycheck to paycheck. Trying to sound impressive. Exactly the version they expected. Exactly the version Olivia wanted them to believe. She folded her arms again. So, how many companies have you built? I looked directly into her eyes. A few. She laughed so loudly that several conversations nearby stopped. There he is. The old Daniel. Always making himself sound important. The room joined her. Not maliciously. Not entirely. People simply love agreeing with the loudest voice. Especially when the target refuses to defend himself. Olivia took another sip of wine. I guess some people never change. I smiled. No, they don't. She misunderstood the meaning behind my answer. She thought I was admitting defeat. She had no idea I wasn't talking about myself. At that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened once again. A sharply dressed man in his 60s entered surrounded by 2 assistants. Conversations immediately shifted. Several guests whispered his name. The reunion. Organizer hurried across the room to greet him. He scanned the crowd for only a second. Then his eyes landed on me. His expression changed instantly. Without hesitation, he smiled broadly and walked straight toward where Olivia and I were standing. And for the first time that evening, the laughter around me slowly began to disappear. People always assume they know why a marriage ended. The truth is, they usually remember the loudest version, not the truest one. 5 years earlier, everyone believed they had watched my marriage fall apart. They thought they knew the story because they had seen the ending. No one had bothered to ask about the chapters before it. When Olivia and I first met, we were 24 years old, broke, ambitious, and convinced that love was enough to survive anything. We met at a charity event organized by our university alumni association. She laughed with her whole heart. I remember that more clearly than her face. Some people smile because they're being polite. Olivia smiled because she genuinely enjoyed life. That was what drew me to her. She challenged me. She believed in impossible goals. She once told me that ordinary people quit because they were too afraid to dream bigger. Ironically, she would become the person who stopped believing in dreams. Our first apartment was barely 600 square feet. The kitchen was so small we couldn't open the refrigerator and the oven at the same time. When it rained, water leaked through one corner of the bedroom ceiling. Instead of complaining, we'd place a bucket underneath and joke that we owned an indoor fountain. Those were some of the happiest years of my life. We didn't have money. We had each other. Every Friday night, we ordered one pizza because buying two felt irresponsible. Every Sunday morning, we walked through the neighborhood park, making plans for a future neither of us could afford yet. "I'll build something one day," I used to tell her. She squeezed my hand. "I know you will." And I believed she meant it. After college, Olivia climbed the corporate ladder much faster than I did. She was intelligent, disciplined, and naturally charismatic. Promotions seemed to find her, wherever she worked. Meanwhile, I changed jobs more than once. Not because I lacked ability, because I kept leaving stable positions to chase business ideas that failed. The first startup lasted 11 months. The second survived 6. The third disappeared before anyone even noticed it existed. Each failure cost us savings. Each failure stole another piece of my confidence. Still, every time I came home after another disappointment, Olivia hugged me. "We'll figure it out." Those words carried me further than she ever realized. Then something changed. Not suddenly. Slowly. Success altered her surroundings. Her co-workers drove luxury cars. Their husbands were attorneys, executives, surgeons, investors. Business dinners replaced homemade meals. Weekend networking events replaced quiet walks in the park. The conversations changed too. Everyone discussed promotions, bonuses, vacation homes, stock portfolios. No one talked about dreams anymore. Only results. One evening, she came home exhausted after another corporate dinner. They asked what you do. I looked up from my laptop. "What did you tell them?" "I said you're working on your company." And she hesitated. They smiled. I understood exactly what kind of smile she meant. The polite one. The sympathetic one. The smile reserved for people chasing something everyone else secretly believes will never happen. After that night, she stopped asking about my ideas. Instead, she asked practical questions. "When will this business actually make money? Shouldn't you apply for something stable? Don't you think we're getting too old for this?" She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to feel safe. Unfortunately, fear often disguises itself as reason. Months passed. Our conversations became shorter. Silences became longer. Dinner was often eaten while one of us stared at a phone. Sometimes both of us did. One night, I surprised her with flowers. She thanked me without looking away from an email. Another night, she worked until midnight. I left dinner warming in the oven. She forgot it was there. Neither of us apologized. Because neither of us believed small moments mattered. We were wrong. Marriages rarely collapse because of one enormous disaster. They disappear beneath thousands of tiny disappointments no one thinks are important until they're impossible to repair. I kept believing one breakthrough would fix everything. One successful company. One major investor. One lucky break. I thought if I could finally become the man I promised her, all the distance between us would vanish. I didn't realize she had already begun measuring my worth by the things I hadn't achieved instead of the man standing beside her. And by the time I finally understood that, our marriage had already started ending long before either of us admitted it. Losing my marriage wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing I had no one left to blame except the man staring back at me in the mirror. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Thursday morning. There were no dramatic arguments. No screaming. No one stormed out of the courtroom. Olivia signed the papers with steady hands. I signed mine the same way. Afterward, she looked at me for a long moment, almost as if she wanted to say something. Instead, she simply whispered, "I hope you find what you've been looking for." Then she walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd without calling her name. Because deep inside, I already knew. She wasn't leaving because she hated me. She was leaving because she no longer believed in me. Those are two very different things. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. The place came furnished with mismatched chairs, faded walls, and a refrigerator that made strange noises every night. It felt temporary, almost like my entire life had been placed into storage while everyone else's kept moving forward. The first few weeks were unbearable. I still reached for the other side of the bed every morning. I still bought groceries for two people. I still caught myself looking for Olivia whenever something funny happened. Grief doesn't disappear when someone leaves. It lingers inside ordinary habits. Friends called during the first month. By the second month, the calls became less frequent. By the third month, silence had settled into my apartment like another piece of furniture. One evening, I opened the closet and found the old notebook where I had written business ideas for years. Hundreds of pages, sketches, calculations, failed plans, dreams that had never survived long enough to become reality. I almost threw it away. Instead, I sat on the floor until nearly sunrise, reading every page. Some ideas deserved to stay buried. Others, I realized they hadn't failed because they were impossible. They had failed because I wasn't ready. There is a difference. The next morning, I made myself a promise. Not to become rich. Not to prove Olivia wrong. Not to impress anyone at all. I promised myself that if I was going to fail again, it would never be because I quit too early. I found contract work that paid just enough to cover rent. During the day, I worked for other people. Every evening, I worked for myself. My apartment slowly transformed into a tiny office. Whiteboards covered the walls. Financial projections replaced framed photographs. Coffee mugs multiplied across every table. There were nights when I slept only 3 hours. There were mornings when I questioned my own sanity. More than once I considered applying for a comfortable corporate job and abandoning everything. Every rejection from investors felt personal. Every unanswered email sounded like another person saying the same thing. He's not good enough. Months passed before anyone agreed to meet with me. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. The investor interrupted my presentation halfway through. You've failed before. I have. So why would this be different? I answered honestly. Because the man who failed before believed passion could replace preparation. And now I have both. He didn't invest. But something unexpected happened. As I packed my laptop, he stopped me. You've changed. I smiled politely. I hope so. No, he said. You don't sound desperate anymore. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. He was right. Somewhere between the divorce and that meeting, desperation had quietly disappeared. I no longer needed everyone to believe in me. I only needed enough discipline to keep believing in myself one more day, one more week, one more month. Progress was painfully slow. The first client brought almost no profit. The second nearly canceled the contract. The third introduced me to someone who introduced me to someone else. Tiny opportunities began connecting like invisible threads. Nothing looked extraordinary from the outside. But underneath, something was beginning to grow. I stopped measuring success by money. Instead, I measured consistency. Did I work today? Did I improve today? Did I become slightly better than the man I had been yesterday? If the answer was yes, I considered the day a victory. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing success to save a marriage. I was building a life that could stand even if I stood alone. I didn't know it then, but somewhere across the city, Olivia was also building a new life. And fate, with its strange sense of timing, was quietly preparing the day when both of our worlds would collide again in a room full of people who thought they already knew how our story had ended. Success rarely arrives with fireworks. More often, it knocks so quietly that only the person who has been waiting every single day hears the sound. My first real breakthrough wasn't a $1 million contract. It was a client who paid every invoice on time. That probably sounds insignificant. To me, it felt like someone had finally confirmed I wasn't building a fantasy anymore. One satisfied client became 3. 3 became 8. 8 became 20. For the first time, referrals came faster than cold emails. People I'd never met started calling because someone they trusted had mentioned my name. I wasn't chasing opportunities anymore. Some of them were beginning to chase me. Even then, I refused to celebrate too early. I'd been fooled by temporary success before. Growth can disappear as quickly as it arrives. So instead of upgrading my apartment, I reinvested almost everything. I hired one employee, then another. A tiny office replaced my living room. The walls were plain. The furniture came from liquidation sales. Our conference table had scratches across the surface from its previous owner. I love that table. It reminded me that beautiful companies don't always begin in beautiful places. Every Monday morning, I gathered my small team together. We're not here to look successful, I told them. We're here to become valuable. Those words eventually became our company's unofficial motto. Months turned into years. The company expanded into new markets. We solved problems that larger firms ignored because they weren't profitable enough. Ironically, those overlooked opportunities became the foundation of everything we built. Investors who had once ignored my emails began requesting meetings. Business magazines wanted interviews. Industry conferences invited me to speak. I accepted very few of them, not because I disliked attention, because I remembered what attention had done to my marriage. Recognition is addictive. Purpose lasts longer. One afternoon, my assistant entered my office carrying a stack of invitations. Another television interview. I smiled. No. A leadership summit. No. A magazine cover? I laughed. Definitely no. She looked genuinely confused. Most founders dream about these opportunities. I used to. And now I'd rather spend the afternoon improving the product. She shook her head as she walked away. You are the strangest CEO I've ever worked for. Maybe she was right. Money had changed my circumstances. It hadn't changed the promises I made to myself inside that tiny apartment years earlier. I bought a house eventually, not because I wanted to impress anyone, because my mother deserved a comfortable place to visit without climbing 3 flights of broken stairs. I purchased a reliable car, then another for the company. Luxury came much later, and even then, I discovered something unexpected. The excitement faded astonishingly fast. The first night in the new house, I stood alone in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee. The silence sounded exactly like it had in my old apartment. Success had solved many problems. Loneliness wasn't one of them. Occasionally, I wondered how Olivia was doing. Not because I wanted her back, simply because she had once been the person who knew every version of me. The hopeful student, the struggling husband, the man terrified of failure. Sometimes I imagined telling her that things had finally worked out, not to prove anything, just to let her know that the years we spent believing in impossible dreams hadn't been completely wasted. But life doesn't move backward. It only carries us toward people we haven't met yet, or back to people we've already outgrown. 5 years passed almost without my noticing. One Friday afternoon, my assistant walked into my office holding an envelope. It came to your home address. I opened it casually. Inside was a formal invitation. Westbrook High School, 5-year alumni reunion. Saturday evening. Attendance encouraged. I almost threw it into the recycling bin. Then I noticed a handwritten note at the bottom. Hope to see both you and Olivia there. The organizer didn't know we had divorced. For a moment, I considered declining. I had board meetings, international partners, deadlines that actually mattered. Why spend an evening reliving a version of myself that no longer existed? Then another thought crossed my mind. Maybe it wasn't about seeing the past. Maybe it was about realizing how far I'd walked away from it. I folded the invitation and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I'll be out tomorrow evening, I told my assistant. She smiled. Big plans. I looked through the office window toward the city skyline that had once felt impossibly distant. No, just visiting some old memories. I had no idea that one simple decision would place me face to face with the woman who believed she already knew the ending of my story. And neither of us realized that by the end of that reunion, only one of us would leave carrying regrets. The loudest room can become completely silent because of a single name. The man walking toward me wasn't one of my classmates. He was older, probably in his early 60s, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked tailored down to the last stitch. His 2 assistants struggled to keep up with him as he crossed the ballroom. Conversations faded one by one. Several people recognized him immediately. So that's Richard Hamilton. I can't believe he actually came. What is he doing here? Richard Hamilton was one of the school's most successful alumni, a billionaire investor, the founder of Hamilton Capital, the kind of man business magazines called a visionary. I had met him 3 years earlier, not at a gala, not at a luxury resort. We met inside a manufacturing warehouse after he unexpectedly visited one of our facilities. He spent 4 hours asking questions. At the end of the visit, he hadn't complimented our revenue. He complimented our culture. That mattered more to me. As he approached, I smiled politely. Richard. His face lit up. Daniel. Without hesitation, he extended both hands. It's been far too long. It has. He laughed warmly. I've been trying to schedule lunch with you for nearly 2 months. I shrugged apologetically. My calendar has been a mess. He leaned closer. That's exactly what your assistant keeps telling mine. Several people standing nearby exchanged confused glances. Olivia looked from him to me and back again. She frowned slightly. You know each other? Richard looked surprised. Know each other? He smiled. I've been trying to convince Daniel to partner with us for years. No one laughed this time. Olivia forced a smile. I think there must be some misunderstanding. Richard looked genuinely puzzled. What do you mean? She gestured toward me. My ex-husband owns a small business. The sentence sounded uncertain even to her. Richard blinked once. Then he chuckled. A small business? He looked at me. I didn't realize that's how people described a company valued in the billions these days. Silence. Complete silence. For a moment, even the music seemed to disappear. Someone dropped a glass near the bar. No one looked. Every eye remained fixed on us. Olivia stared at me as if she had forgotten how to breathe. What did you say? Richard answered naturally, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake he had just caused. Daniel's company has become one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the country. He smiled proudly. Our analysts have followed his work for years. One of my former classmates laughed nervously. Wait, you're serious? Richard looked confused by the question. Of course I'm serious. Another classmate pulled out his phone. Within seconds, several others did. The same. I already knew what they were searching. My company's website, business articles, conference interviews, market reports, photos I had tried very hard to avoid taking. One by one, their expressions changed. Confusion, disbelief, recognition. A man who had laughed with Olivia only minutes earlier looked up from his phone. Oh my God, it's really him. Someone whispered the estimated valuation. Another read an article headline aloud. Another found a photograph of me standing beside government officials during an economic summit. The whispers multiplied. I've seen this company before. They're everywhere. I didn't know Daniel was that Daniel. Olivia remained perfectly still. The wine glass in her hand trembled slightly. She looked at me, searching my face for some sign that this was a joke. I simply met her eyes with the same calm expression I had worn all evening. Richard continued talking, oblivious to the tension. I've always admired something about Daniel. He turned toward the group. Do you know how many founders become successful? A few people shrugged. Very few. Do you know how many remain humble afterward? He smiled. Even fewer. I felt uncomfortable. Praise had always embarrassed me. Richard. He waved dismissively. No. They deserve to know. He looked back at everyone. Daniel built everything without shortcuts. No scandals. No flashy headlines. He simply kept solving problems while everyone else was busy talking. Those words hit harder than any compliment about money ever could. Across from me, Olivia slowly lowered her glass. For the first time since I'd entered the ballroom, she wasn't looking at me with amusement. She was looking at me as though she were trying to reconcile two completely different versions of the same man. The husband she had left behind, and the stranger standing in front of her. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Why? She swallowed. Why didn't you ever tell me? I smiled gently. Because the answer had stopped hurting a long time ago. You stopped believing my words years before anyone started believing my results. She opened her mouth to respond. Nothing came out. Around us, the room had changed. The laughter was gone. The whispers had become admiration. And for the first time that night, I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel victorious. I simply felt free. Nothing changes people's behavior faster than discovering they were wrong about someone. The difference was almost immediate. 5 minutes earlier, I had been the forgotten ex-husband standing quietly near the entrance. Now, people who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered my name. Daniel, congratulations. I had no idea. You've done incredibly well. I've actually followed your company. Some of them were sincere. Others weren't. It's amazing how confidence sounds identical to embarrassment until you look into someone's eyes. I smiled politely at each person, shook every hand, accepted every compliment. Not because I needed their approval, because bitterness is a heavy thing to carry after you finally learned how to put it down. Richard excused himself to greet a few members of the alumni committee. Before leaving, he gave my shoulder a light pat. Call me Monday. We still have unfinished business. I will. As soon as he disappeared into the crowd, the circle around me grew even larger. Questions came from every direction. When did all this happen? How many employees do you have now? Are you expanding overseas? What inspired the company? I answered briefly. I had learned years ago that the most successful conversations are often the shortest ones. Across the room, I noticed Olivia standing alone. No one was laughing with her anymore. No one was looking at her. Instead, nearly every conversation somehow circled back to me. She wasn't being ignored out of cruelty. She had simply stopped being the center of attention. I knew that feeling. Years ago, I had stood beside her while every room naturally gravitated toward her confidence. Tonight, the room had chosen someone else. Our eyes met. She looked away first. A few minutes later, she slowly walked toward me. The confidence she wore earlier had disappeared. So, her voice was quieter now. I guess congratulations are in order. Thank you. She nodded awkwardly. I read about your company. I didn't know. I know. There was a long silence. 5 years of memories seemed to stand between us. She glanced around the ballroom. They're all talking about you. I noticed. You could have told me. I smiled gently. When? She frowned. What do you mean? Before the reunion. I shook my head. If I had called to tell you I became successful, what would that have sounded like? She didn't answer. Like I wanted revenge? Like I wanted validation? Like I wanted you to regret leaving? She lowered her eyes. I suppose. You wouldn't have believed me anyway. She sighed softly. Probably not. That honesty surprised me. For the first time all evening, neither of us was pretending. I spent years thinking about this conversation, she admitted. Really, I imagined running into you someday. And I always pictured myself being happier than you. She laughed once. It wasn't joyful. It sounded tired. Life doesn't always cooperate with our imagination. I studied her face carefully. She still looked beautiful, but there were things makeup couldn't hide. Exhaustion, loneliness, the subtle sadness that settles into someone's expression after too many disappointments. Are you happy, Olivia? The question escaped before I realized I had asked it. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the dance floor where several couples were laughing together. Finally, I don't know. That answer felt painfully honest. She took a slow breath. I chased everything I thought mattered. The promotions, the bigger apartment, the expensive vacations, the perfect image. She smiled bitterly. I got almost all of it. And I kept waiting to feel like I'd won. Her eyes drifted back to mine. It never happened. I understood that feeling better than she realized. Money can solve stress. It cannot manufacture peace. Before I could respond, one of our classmates interrupted us. Daniel. He held out his phone. My son wants to intern at your company someday. Another person stepped forward. Then another. The conversation was over before it had really begun. Olivia quietly stepped aside. She watched as people surrounded me once. Again, I caught one final glimpse of her before the crowd blocked my view. She wasn't looking at my suit, or my watch, or the articles on everyone's phones. She was looking at me. Not the billionaire. Not the CEO. Just the man she had once believed would never become anything. For the first time since our divorce, I saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years earlier. It wasn't envy. It wasn't admiration. It was grief. The kind that arrives only after someone realizes they didn't lose a future because life was unfair. They lost it because they walked away from it themselves. And somehow, that realization hurt me almost as much as it hurt her. Regret is a strange emotion. It doesn't arrive when you make the wrong decision. It arrives years later, when you finally understand what that decision truly cost you. The reunion slowly returned to normal. Music filled the ballroom again. People drifted toward the dance floor. Old friends laughed over forgotten stories. From a distance, it probably looked like an ordinary alumni gathering. Only a handful of us knew that something irreversible had happened in the middle of the room. I stepped outside onto the hotel's terrace. The cool evening air felt refreshing after the crowded ballroom. The city lights stretched across the horizon like thousands of tiny stars. For a few peaceful minutes, I stood there alone. Then I heard the familiar sound of heels approaching behind me. I thought I'd find you here. I didn't turn around immediately. I needed some fresh air. So did I. Olivia walked beside me and rested her hands on the balcony railing. Neither of us spoke. Silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It simply felt honest. After nearly a minute, she smiled sadly. You still do that? Do what? When things become overwhelming. She looked toward the skyline. You always find somewhere quiet. I laughed softly. I guess some habits survive divorce. She nodded. They do. Another silence settled between us. This one carried less tension. More memories. Finally, she spoke. I've replayed our marriage so many times. I remained quiet. I kept telling myself I left because we wanted different things. She exhaled slowly. But tonight. She shook her head. I realized that wasn't true. I looked at her. We wanted the same future. She smiled faintly. I just stopped believing you could build it. Those words carried no accusation. Only acceptance. I know, I answered. I wish I'd trusted you longer. I wish I'd become the man you needed sooner. She turned toward me. You still blame yourself? I blamed myself for years. And now? I thought carefully before answering. Now I understand we both failed. She looked surprised. You don't hate me? The question caught me off guard. Hate you? She nodded. I humiliated you tonight. I left you. I laughed when everyone else laughed. Her voice cracked slightly. If our positions had been reversed. She couldn't finish the sentence. I leaned against the railing. Olivia, I stopped hating you a long time ago. When? The day I realized carrying resentment was keeping me connected to a life that no longer existed. She stared at me without speaking. I forgave you, I continued. Not because you asked. Because I wanted peace more than I wanted justice. For a moment, tears gathered in her eyes. She quickly looked away. I don't deserve that. Maybe. But forgiveness isn't earned. It's given. She laughed quietly through her tears. You always had a way of saying things that made me think. I had plenty of time to think. She smiled. I can see that. The ballroom doors opened behind us. Laughter echoed outside before fading again. Neither of us moved. I remarried, she said unexpectedly. I looked at her. For about a year. I didn't know. Most people don't. What happened? She gave a small, humorless laugh. I married certainty. I frowned. He had the perfect career. The perfect house. The perfect image. She paused. But he never looked at me the way you used to. There was no bitterness in her voice. Only exhaustion. He loved winning. I wanted kindness. She swallowed hard. I realized too late that they aren't the same thing. I'm sorry. I know. She smiled sadly. And before you say it, I don't want your pity. You have it anyway. She laughed again. This is exactly why I fell in love with you. The words lingered between us. Neither of us tried to pretend they hadn't been spoken. After a while, she reached into her purse. She pulled out something small. A worn silver keychain. I recognized it instantly. It was shaped like a tiny compass. I had given it to her during our first year of marriage. The words engraved on the back were almost faded. No matter where life takes us, find your way home. I kept it, she whispered. All these years. I stared at the little compass resting in her palm. Not because it represented our marriage. Because it represented the people we had once been. Young. Hopeful. Certain that love alone could survive anything. Sometimes I wonder whether people truly change. Or whether life simply strips away the illusions until only our real selves remain. Olivia carefully closed her hand around the keychain. I can't change what I did. No. I can't ask you to erase the past. No. She nodded slowly. I know. Then she looked directly into my eyes with a quiet vulnerability I hadn't seen since we were newly married. There is only one question I still need the courage to ask. And somehow, before she spoke another word, I already knew exactly what that question would be. The hardest word to say isn't goodbye. It's again. Olivia looked at me with eyes that held more honesty than I had seen in years. There is only one question I still need the courage to ask. I waited quietly. She took a slow breath. If life gave us another chance. Her voice almost disappeared. Would you ever consider us again? The question floated between us like fragile glass. 5 years earlier, I would have answered before she finished speaking. Tonight, I didn't. Not because I wanted to hurt her. Because some questions deserve the respect of silence before they receive an answer. She lowered her eyes. I know it's unfair. I know I have no right to ask. She stopped. I needed to know. I looked out across the city lights one last time before turning back toward her. Do you remember the first apartment we rented? She smiled faintly. The one with the broken heater. And the leaking kitchen sink. She laughed softly. We thought it was perfect. It was. We had almost nothing. But every night we sat on the floor eating takeout because we couldn't afford a dining table. She nodded. I remember. We used to talk for hours. About everything. The future. The family we wanted. The places we hoped to travel. Her eyes filled with tears again. I remember all of it. I smiled. So do I. Another quiet moment passed. Do you know what I miss most? She looked surprised. I don't miss being poor. I don't miss working 18-hour days. I don't even miss the uncertainty. I shook my head gently. I miss who we were before fear entered our marriage. She closed her eyes. So do I. The problem is, I continued carefully. Those two people don't exist anymore. She opened her eyes. I could see the truth reaching her before my words fully did. We've both become someone else. You survived your pain. I survived mine. The people standing here tonight were shaped by 5 years of completely different lives. She whispered, people can start over. They can. So starting over isn't the same as going backward. She looked down at the small silver compass still resting in her hand. I was afraid you'd say that. I know. Tears rolled quietly down her cheeks. I spent years thinking success was everything. Then I lost my second marriage. I lost friends. I lost pieces of myself. She laughed bitterly. And tonight I realized. I lost the only man who ever loved me before I had anything to offer. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they changed my mind. Because I believed she truly meant them. I stepped closer. Carefully, I closed her fingers around the little compass. Keep it. She looked confused. I wanted to give it back. No, it belongs to you. But it reminds you of who you were. And maybe it will help you become someone you'll be proud of again. She stared at me for several long seconds. You've changed. I hope so. No. She smiled through her tears. You became the man I always prayed you'd become. She paused. I just wasn't there to see it. I answered quietly. And you became someone strong enough to admit the truth. That's not easy either. For the first time that evening, she smiled without sadness. Thank you. What for? For not punishing me. I deserved worse. I shook my head. Life already punished both of us enough. The ballroom doors opened again. Someone announced that the reunion was ending. People began collecting coats and exchanging final hugs. The night that had started with laughter at my expense was quietly coming to an end. Olivia looked toward the exit. I guess this is really goodbye. I smiled gently. I don't think so. She frowned. No, I think it's simply the beginning of 2 different futures. She nodded slowly. I hope yours is beautiful. It already is. And yours? She looked at the compass in her hand. Then she looked back at me. I don't know yet. But for the first time in years, I think I finally know where to start. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. The hug lasted only a few seconds. There was no romance inside it. No promise. No unfinished love story waiting to be rewritten. Only gratitude. Only forgiveness. Only 2 people saying farewell to the versions of themselves that had once destroyed each other. When she finally let go, she whispered one last sentence. I'll always be thankful that I knew you. I watched her walk toward the ballroom doors. This time, I didn't watch the woman I had lost. I watched someone who had finally found the courage to stop running from herself. And somehow, that felt like the happiest ending either of us could have asked for. People often ask me what it feels like to become successful. They expect me to describe private jets, boardrooms, television interviews, numbers with too many zeros. I usually disappoint them. Because success didn't arrive the day my company reached a billion-dollar valuation. It arrived years earlier. The morning I woke up and realized I no longer needed anyone to regret losing me. That was the day I became truly free. The reunion ended shortly after Olivia walked away. Classmates stopped me near the exit for one final round of handshakes. Business cards were exchanged. Promises to stay in touch were made. Some of those promises would be forgotten before the week ended. That's how reunions work. People don't gather to continue the past. They gather to remember it. As I walked toward my car, I heard someone call my name. Daniel. I turned around. It was Mr. Anderson, our old history teacher. His hair had turned completely white since graduation, but I recognized his smile immediately. I almost didn't recognize you, he said. I've changed. He laughed. So have I. We stood together in the parking lot beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. I watched everything that happened tonight. I smiled awkwardly. I'm sorry if it became uncomfortable. He shook his head. No, it became educational. I laughed. How so? He looked toward the hotel entrance. When you were 17, I wrote something in your final report. I searched my memory. I don't remember. I do. He smiled warmly. I wrote, some people bloom early. Some bloom late. The late bloomers often grow the strongest roots. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I wasn't always sure I believed those words, he admitted. But tonight, he gently patted my shoulder. You proved they were true. Those words meant more to me than any business award hanging in my office, because they came from someone who had known me before ambition, before failure, before success, before life complicated everything. After saying goodbye, I drove home alone. The city was quiet. No reporters, no cameras, no applause, just headlights stretching across empty roads. When I opened my front door, the house greeted me with the same peaceful silence it always had. I placed my keys on the kitchen counter, removed my jacket, poured myself a cup of coffee, even though it was far too late to drink one. Old habits die slowly. I walked toward the large window overlooking the city. Years ago, I had stood in a tiny apartment holding an inexpensive mug while wondering whether life would ever change. Tonight, I stood in a home I had once thought impossible. The view was different. The man looking through the glass was different. But the lesson remained exactly the same. Happiness had never been waiting inside the next promotion, the next investment, the next achievement. It had been quietly growing every time I chose discipline over excuses, forgiveness over resentment, hope over fear. A few days later, a small package arrived at my office. There was no return address. Inside was the silver compass, the one I had told Olivia to keep. Attached to it was a handwritten note. It read, "Thank you for helping me find my way home. This time, I finally understand that home isn't a person. It's the peace we build inside ourselves." Olivia, I smiled as I folded the note and placed it inside the drawer of my desk. Not with old photographs, not with painful memories, but beside the notebook where my very first business ideas still rested. Both belonged there. One reminded me where my dreams had begun. The other reminded me what those dreams had cost. People sometimes imagine my story is about becoming a billionaire after a painful divorce. They're wrong. Money simply made the story more visible. The real victory happened long before anyone recognized my name. It happened when I stopped measuring my worth through someone else's opinion. When I understood that rejection is not proof of inadequacy. Sometimes it is simply redirection. If my marriage had survived, perhaps I would never have discovered the resilience hidden inside me. If my company had failed, perhaps I still would have become a better man. Because success was never the destination. Character was. I never attended another school reunion. I didn't need to. The person I had spent years trying to prove myself to no longer existed. Neither did the insecure young husband desperate for validation. Only Daniel remained. A man who had learned that wealth can change your lifestyle. Fame can change your reputation. But only forgiveness can change your life. And if my story leaves you with anything, I hope it's this. Never laugh at someone because they're behind. You don't know what they're building while the world isn't watching. Sometimes the quietest person in the room isn't losing. Sometimes they're simply too busy becoming the person everyone else will one day wish they had believed in from the very beginning.